hello, BookTube. We're going to give this a try. We're going to try resuming our library bookshelf tour after a long delay that was caused by structural problems and a mess. And I apologize for the harsh ceiling light, but the sun has once again disappeared from Boston and will be gone for the foreseeable future, so there's no sense waiting for it. So everything's going to have to be done by artificial light, but that's all right. So I thought we'd start high up above the ground with the bookshelf number 1 of the middle west wall bookcase. And as usual, we'll start with the books that are transverse on top, that are piled on top. The first one being a Norton Critical edition of the poetry of Edmund Spenser. This is, for those of you who've been watching this channel or who probably know it anyway, the Norton Critical editions, you get the text at the beginning, and then you get essays at the back, dealing with the author's life and times and the work themselves. And I love them. I wish I had a whole library of them, but they take up a lot of space, and I don't end up consulting them as often as I always think I will. But I keep the ones for the authors I really love, and Edmund Spenser is one of those. And then the next 2 are bleed over from the next shelf over, which is almost entirely dedicated to book essays, literary criticism, reviews, that sort of thing. And the first one is a classic of the genre. It's Nothing But Critical by the great Robert Hughes. This is mostly about art, and he's one of the only writers I know of that's great about art, even contemporary art, which was his stomping ground. And the other one is Literary Occasions by V.S. Naipaul. A very stately-looking hardcover that I found really cheap at the Brattle that has gems in it. I am not Naipaul's biggest fan, to put it mildly, but when he writes about literature, I find him more bearable than I do when he writes about almost anything else. And then we go on to the books themselves. And the first one, I think we might have seen on this channel before. It might actually have been on a previous shelf. So the problem with library tours for somebody like me is that my books aren't static. They move around a lot. But it doesn't matter. We'll just see it again. It's Robert Massey's enormous history, Dreadnought, about the build-up to World War I. And it is immensely readable. It's a huge amount of work that he does. It's the masterpiece of a lifetime, except he's written many books that are just as good. And the wealth of anecdotes and personal portraits that he draws of the main characters. Oh, it's endlessly great. I read it when it first came out, and then I was working at a Barnes & Noble when we got a stack of remainders of this book for like $5 a piece, and I bought a whole bunch of them to give away and to keep, and I only have the one left, so I'm glad I do. The next one is my beloved Anthony Trollope, and this is The Warden, a very slim novel of his, a place I often advise people to start with him, as all of his gentle humor is on display here, and also a lot of his social insight, his social satire. But it's all very approachable. And this is this particular volume is illustrated, and that's why I got it, because it's this nice lightweight hardcover illustrated thing. I wish I had a whole bookcase of Trollope, each one of which was different from all the others, each one of which was like this, just the perfect thing that I wanted to have. But I don't. The next one is from the 1920s, I believe. This is Bob Lawrence's, when is this? Yeah, 1922. This is Bob Lawrence's Old Park Street and Its Vicinity. A great old narrative history gossip, really, about Park Street here in Boston. And he goes house number by house number, 1, 2, 3, 4, giving the history and the colorful personalities involved all along the way. And it's a wonderful thing. You'd never see it. You know, you'd have to have access to someplace like the Brattle Bookshop here in Boston to find it at all. But I know every house that he writes about. I've been inside every corner of every one of them. So it's always amazing for me to take it down to reread it. And then British history. We'll do a pair of British histories here. This is Aspects of Aristocracy. It's a collection of essays by David Carradine, who's one of my favorite late 20th century British historians and social critics and book reviewers. His collections of book reviews are not to be missed. And this is just, he was fascinated with post-war British aristocracy, what they do, what roles they play, what their personalities are, and I'm fascinated with that too, since I know some members. So I love the book. I was happy to find it as a hardcover. And the next one is just, it's really not, it's a little oddity in this room in that it's not really here because it's the best example of its kind. It's just an example that I happened to get and put on the shelf. It's The English Country House. This one is by Robin Fedden and John Kenworthy Brown. But I got it because it's lavishly illustrated. It's got illustrations all throughout. And guides to English country houses show up at the aforementioned Brattle Bookshop all the time, in all sizes and shapes. I got this one because it just struck my fancy, and also because it's the normal size of a book. It's not a big picture book like they usually are. I was interested in it for the same reason I was interested in Aspects of Aristocracy, because I have been in many English country homes, and I have been in enough of them, and enough seasons of the year and times, and with the right hostesses and the hosts and guests, to know the absolutely undeniable charm they have. When you read about that, it's true. It's not just tourism billing. And then the next two we'll do as a pair. This is an oft revisited pair here on my shelf, and it's a person we've seen before. This is Taft and Roosevelt, The Intimate Letters of Archie Butt. Let me see if I can show you a picture of him in all of his finery. Is this volume 2? Yes, it is. All right, so let's start with volume 1. Archie Butt was... Let's see if I can make this clear. There's a little Popinjay right there. He was a Southern boy and extremely skilled eye slicker, who made it look like he wasn't, like he was being, two-fisted and and independent. And he was an indispensable aide for Theodore Roosevelt when Roosevelt was in the White House. And then when Roosevelt was leaving, Archie Butt assumed he would leave too. But Roosevelt's successor, William Howard Taft, begged him to stay, and so did Taft's wife. They said, you know how everything runs. We're not planning any major changes. You will be invaluable. And Archie Butt wasn't sure that he should do it because he loved Roosevelt and he didn't know this new guy really well at all. But he did stay. And these letters cover his time in the Taft White House up until he was feeling worn down and needed a vacation, a nice, big, opulent vacation of the type he never took. And Taft was perfectly okay. He kept telling him, my good man, you're as tired as can be. Go and take a long vacation and be restored when you come back. And so Archie Butt did. On the Titanic. And died. So, that's... But the letters breathe with life. They're amazing. As a primary source for the Taft administration, they're amazing. And that's why there have been 4, I think, in 100 years, there have been 4 serious studies of the Taft administration. And when I go to their bibliographies, if they haven't consulted these books, I don't bother to read them. Or not read them seriously, because this is a guy who was there and who was taking notes for posterity and who had every reason in the world to be honest. One thing I'll say about him, I have all sorts of criticisms to say about Archie Butt, but he never told a lie. So I love these books. I love this pair even more than the Roosevelt volume that we've already seen. And then the next one is a historian I love. This is a collection of short pieces. This is The Augustan Aristocracy by Ronald Sim, the author of The Roman Revolution, which is a seminal work of history of ancient Rome. And this is a collection of portraits, really, drawn in the Sim fashion from the primary sources, even as scattered as they could possibly be. References, half a line, an allusion in a poem. He was better at that than anybody has ever been, and it comes through in his writing, which is very punchy anyway. He's very entertaining to read. The Augustan Aristocracy, a lot like the Roman Revolution, is not a book that you can just hand to somebody who's interested in ancient Rome. Unfortunately, Sim never wrote at that level. So you really need to kind of sort of work your way up to him, or you're going to be playing catch up the whole time, because he's not slowing down for you. And just as he famously never slowed down for his students. But if you have a certain familiarity with ancient Rome under your belt, there's nobody better to read. And the Augustan Aristocracy, every essay breaks ground, which is amazing to read, even now, after all these decades later than the book appeared and that Sim died. it's still amazing and thrilling to read, realizing that this author is making first time ever inferences from scanty classical sources right in front of you on the page. That's just amazing. I know I'm probably making it sound very boring, but it isn't. You just have to take my word for it. The next one is was an unlikely bestseller for serious history, and that is the Lyle Letters. This is, but it was edited by Muriel St. Clair Byrne, and it was edited from a gigantic library shelf of the collected correspondence of Lord Lyle, who was lieutenant at Calais for the Tudors, and who was later put on treason trial, mainly because he was a Plantagenet, but also for all sorts of other reasons that him and his no good wife got up to. And that's the story that's told in this volume. Is the story. The editor does a fantastic job pulling together the melodrama of that story from their extensive correspondence. And the thing ends up being a marvel. I'm not surprised at all that word of mouth propelled it, into some regional bestseller list. I thought that was absolutely great. And I am a big fan of Tudor England. For those of you who might be new, I love it, and I pull this book down all the time for that very reason. And then we go back to ancient Rome. And this is another classic. It's the Augustan Aristocracy is not a classic. It's a hodgepodge. It's a collection of stuff. The Roman Revolution by Ronald Sim is a classic, and this one is a Roman history classic. This is the Senate of Imperial Rome, and this is by Richard Talbot. And I think this came out 30 years ago. 1984 is when this came out, and it mostly deals with the Roman Senate after the emperors. When the Senate existed in this weird Netherland where it no longer had unchallenged absolute power over society the way it had for 600 years, but where it wasn't nothing. It wasn't yet completely ceremonial. There was an emperor, and he could put senators to death at will. But he needed the Senate to do all sorts of things, and this is a great examination of that dichotomy, that very uneven relationship. I'm not right at the moment writing anything long or protracted about ancient Rome. I am writing a series about the Tudors, but I'm sure that I will in the future, and I keep the classics of Roman history with me. I don't get rid of them. And then the last book for this shelf is fairly new. This is a new collection of the letters and journals of Lord Byron. I think this might even have the pub sheet still in it. No. All right, well, this came out in 2015, so fairly recent for it to be in this room. But I knew as soon as I read it that I was going to put it in here, because Lord Byron has had many editions of his letters and journals, and oh boy, are they worth reading. They're amazingly good. If it weren't heresy, I would almost say that his letters and journals are better than his poetry. He's had many, many, many editions, but this one I really, really liked. I liked it not only because of the selection involved, the editing is actually very good, but also in terms of the scholarly acumen of the supporting material, which is first rate. So that's why I made it in here when plenty of 2015 books, in fact almost all of them, didn't. And there you have it. That is bookshelf number 1 of the thin West Wall bookcase. And once you recover from your tedium catatonia, we'll go on to bookshelf number 2. Thank you, BookTube.